Carter had rehearsed the pitch at least a dozen times that morning. She could still hear the rhythm of her words playing like a quiet metronome in her head as she stepped into the 21st floor conference room of Monroe and Blake, the view of the Manhattan skyline stretching endlessly behind the floor-to-ceiling glass panels. She wore a tailored navy blazer, heels that clicked confidence with every step, and a gloss of calm professionalism across her face, one she had perfected over the years. This meeting could seal a multi-million-dollar campaign. It wasn't just business, it was personal progress. Around the sleek walnut table sat 5 executives, including Julian Monroe, the man she had worked tirelessly to impress. The air buzzed with caffeine and restrained expectations. Emily breathed in, clicked the presentation remote, and started. Thank you all for making the time today. Our strategy hinges on 3 pillars: vision, value, and voice. Let's start with vision. Her voice was steady, her gestures measured. As slides clicked forward, she saw nods. Julian's brows lifted in that subtle approval she'd learned to read. Then the door slammed open. A gust of hallway air rushed in, followed by a presence she recognized without turning. Thomas. His heavy steps broke the rhythm of her speech. Her fingers froze on the remote. Her mouth stayed open, mid-sentence, as her mind tried to justify his appearance. Emily. His voice echoed off the glass. She turned, heart pounding. Thomas looked disheveled. His shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, his eyes bloodshot and unfocused. He stood, staring at her like she was a stranger who owed him something. I told you not to ignore my calls. Her throat tightened. I'm in a meeting, she whispered, almost pleading. Glancing at the clients, all suddenly silent. He walked toward her. Who is he? He spat, gesturing vaguely at the room. That one? You canceled dinner with your husband for him? Thomas, please? His hand moved faster than her words. The sound was sharp, wet, echoing louder than the city noise beyond the glass. Her head snapped to the side, hair falling over her face, the sting immediate and blinding. For a second, she tasted metal. No one moved, no one breathed. The presentation screen behind her dimmed into black. The room shrank, but Emily didn't cry, didn't flinch. Slowly, she lifted her head and met his gaze. Something in her had snapped, not like a fragile glass breaking, but like a rope pulled too tight for too long, finally giving way. You just ended our marriage, she said, her voice trembling but clear. In case you're wondering what you came here to do. Thomas blinked, confusion flickering in his eyes. She turned back to the table. I apologize. Let's take a 5-minute break. Then she walked out, heels still clicking. She didn't run, didn't let her hand tremble until she reached the elevator. When the doors closed, she let herself lean against the cold wall and exhale all the years she had spent explaining, forgiving, negotiating. By the time she reached the street, she had already decided. No more. No more silent suffering in the name of appearances. No more shrinking to make space for his ego. She hailed a cab, ignoring the buzz of her phone. The cab smelled like old leather and citrus air freshener, and it carried her back to the apartment they had shared for 6 years. The doorman greeted her, unaware anything had changed. Mrs. Carter? He smiled. She nodded. Afternoon, George. Upstairs, she moved on instinct. She pulled out a suitcase, went to the bedroom, and began folding clothes, not neatly, not carefully, just fast. Shirts, jeans, charger, passport. Every item into the suitcase was a sentence she didn't speak. I am not yours. I don't owe you a reason. This is the last time I walk through this door. When she reached the dresser, she stopped. Her wedding ring caught the light. Slowly, deliberately, she pulled it off and left it on the marble counter. It made no sound, but it felt louder than the slap. She left the house key beside it. By the time Thomas returned, the apartment would be quieter than it had ever been. She closed the suitcase, picked up her phone, and dialed her lawyer. I'd like to file for divorce, she said. The voice on the other end hesitated. Emily, are you sure? She looked out the window, watching as the city kept moving. Horns honked, people crossed streets, the sun dipped behind buildings as if nothing had happened. I've never been more sure in my life. Emily sat across from her attorney in an office that smelled faintly of coffee and printer ink. The paperwork was already drawn up, clean, direct, clinical. She didn't read every word. She didn't need to. The important parts were already etched in her memory. irreconcilable differences, physical abuse in a professional setting, irrevocable breach of trust. "I'll sign," she said, her voice even. The lawyer, a kind woman named Miriam, nodded and passed her a pen. Emily's fingers were steady as she signed each page, not because she felt calm, but because she'd grown tired of shaking, tired of doubting, tired of waiting for apologies that always came too late or never came at all. When the final signature dried, Miriam gave her a measured look. "You understand he has the right to contest." Emily stared at the pen still in her hand. "He won't." She was right. Thomas didn't call that night, or the next. No message, no confrontation, no apology. The man who had once insisted he couldn't sleep without hearing her voice now couldn't even bother to ask why she left. The silence was deafening, but it wasn't empty. It was full of everything he wasn't saying, every justification he thought he didn't owe her. The apartment Emily moved into was small, half-furnished, and quiet. Too quiet. She hadn't cried. Not when she packed, not at the lawyer's office, and not now, sitting on a mattress without a frame, eating cold noodles out of a takeout box. But silence had a way of slipping under the door, wrapping itself around her like fog. She didn't cry, but her chest felt heavy, like grief with no funeral. Tasha was the first to break the stillness. She barged in with bags of groceries, a bottle of wine, and zero sympathy for Thomas. "I brought real food," she said, slamming the fridge shut. "And before you say anything, no, you are not allowed to rot here like a Netflix cliché. You're Emily Carter, not someone's leftover." Emily gave her a weak smile, grateful for the distraction, but something deeper in her simmered. It wasn't sadness. It was rage, polite, restrained rage. That weekend, the story hit the media. At first, it was a whisper. Emily Carter, executive at Lane Marketing, files for divorce hours after being struck in public by novelist husband Thomas Hart. Then the whispers turned into hashtags. Some showed support, others didn't. There's always two sides to a story. Are we just going to cancel someone for a slap? Maybe she provoked him. These women love drama. Emily scrolled through the comments at midnight, alone. Each word was like a splinter under her skin. She closed her laptop without responding. She wouldn't explain, not to strangers hiding behind profile pictures, not to people who had never stayed quiet through slammed doors, or justified bruises as just stress, or cried in bathrooms during dinner parties because their husband made them feel small in front of friends. But the question lingered, even in the silence. What did she do to deserve it? Emily thought about that. About the times she skipped lunch to proofread Thomas's drafts, canceled meetings to attend his readings, laughed off his barbed jokes in public, kissed him when he didn't kiss back. She thought about how often she'd apologize for being tired, for being successful, for being herself. The worst part wasn't the slap. The worst part was how long she had accepted less than she deserved, and how easily people could believe she deserved even that. Miriam called the next morning. "He still hasn't responded," she said. Emily sipped her coffee. It was cold. "He won't. He's playing victim." Tasha, who had slept over on the couch, snorted. "Let him. He can drown in the sympathy of people who don't know the truth." But Emily wasn't so sure anymore. The truth felt slippery. In a world that only believed women when they screamed or bled, would her story even matter? Still, she dressed up the next day, put on heels, and went to work like nothing had happened. Her coworkers gave her looks, some curious, some pitying, some judgmental. She ignored them all. At the elevator, someone whispered behind her. "Isn't she the one who—" Emily turned her head sharply. The whisperer shut up. She stood tall, her chin up. Let them talk. Because if there was one thing she had learned, it was this. The silence could only crush her if she let it, and she had no intention of ever being crushed again. Before the silence, before the headlines, there was a man who used to leave handwritten notes on Emily's breakfast plate. Short phrases scribbled in blue ink, "Knock them dead today," or "Dinner's on me tonight." Notes folded neatly beside her coffee mug. She used to collect them in a small wooden box under her jewelry drawer. Back then, Thomas was thoughtful, charming in that slightly disheveled way artists often are. He'd speak in metaphors, compare her laugh to sunlight in late autumn, and quote obscure poetry when she felt insecure. In those early years, she believed he truly saw her. He used to call her Firefly, not because she was small, but because, in his words, you glow in places where others get lost. She had glowed, at least she thought she had. The unraveling didn't happen all at once. It came in quiet moments. The first thread came loose the year Emily got promoted to lead strategist. She remembered coming home late, her heels in one hand, takeaway in the other, only to find Thomas slumped on the couch, half drunk, with his laptop open and his manuscript untouched. "Promotion went through," she said with a tired smile. He didn't look up. "So now you'll be gone more?" She laughed at first, thinking he was joking. "Thomas, this is good news." He didn't smile. He just closed his laptop and disappeared into their bedroom without a word. She stood there, still holding the takeaway, the door clicking shut like a punctuation mark she hadn't prepared for. Over time, the congratulations faded. The little notes stopped. The jokes turned sharper. He began comparing their successes. "You get emails from the CEO. I get ignored by my agent." She tried to encourage him. She read his drafts, gave feedback, recommended contacts. But her support only seemed to widen the space between them. If she said something good, he accused her of being patronizing. If she criticized a paragraph, he called her corporate and emotionless. Then came the punishments. Quiet ones. No fights, no screaming, just withdrawal. He wouldn't speak for days if she missed a dinner because of work. He'd stay out all night without explanation, then return as if nothing had happened. When she asked where he'd been, he would tilt his head and say, "What, now you care?" She began measuring her words, timing her enthusiasm, pretending not to notice when he flirted too long with women at literary events, pretending not to care when he rolled his eyes every time she took a business call at home. He told her once, "You always need to win. Can't you let me have something?" She wanted to tell him she didn't care about winning. She cared about them. But she didn't say it. By then, words felt useless. They either became ammunition or were ignored entirely. Still, she stayed. Because for every cruel moment, there were remnants of the man he once was. Once, she found him asleep at his desk with her campaign billboard printed and pinned to the wall. Another time, after a long day, he cooked her favorite risotto and watched her eat in silence, resting his chin on his hand like he used to. She convinced herself those moments meant something, that the love wasn't dead, just dormant. But the truth is, she had started shrinking. Bit by bit, she laughed less, said no less, worked harder, came home softer, and tried to never shine too brightly. Until the slap. That moment, when his palm collided with her face in front of strangers, was not just a violent act. It was the loudest thing he had ever said to her, louder than the silences, louder than the guilt-tripping, louder than every condescending sigh he had ever given when she spoke with confidence. That slap wasn't the beginning. It was the end of a pattern. Now, as she stood by her apartment window, staring at the city that pulsed with stories, she no longer romanticized the past. She let herself feel angry, not at the man who slapped her, but at the man she had let chip away at her for years. The man who taught her that love could feel like guilt and loyalty like obligation. She opened her phone, scrolled through old photos, those curated smiles, those couple poses at readings, at fundraisers, on rooftops, and began deleting them one by one. Not out of spite, but out of truth. He was magnetic, yes, but magnets can repel too, and she was tired of being pulled into darkness just because she once called it light. Emily hadn't planned on ever seeing Julian Monroe again, not outside of a boardroom at least. After the slap, she assumed he, like everyone else, would quietly distance himself, grateful that the scandal hadn't touched his name or company. But 4 days after she filed for divorce, his assistant called. "Mr. Monroe would like to schedule a coffee with you," the woman said, her tone polite but clipped. Nothing formal, just a conversation. Emily almost said no. Not because she was afraid, but because she was tired. Tired of people watching her, not knowing whether they saw a victim, a woman scorned, or a woman who had simply had enough. Still, something in Julian's quiet gaze during that terrible meeting lingered with her. He hadn't looked away. He hadn't flinched. And most importantly, he hadn't pitied her. She arrived at the cafe early, not by choice, but by habit. Her eyes scanned the entrance every time the bell above the door chimed, until he finally walked in, alone, without a briefcase or bodyguard, wearing a simple navy coat and no tie. Clean lines, composed posture. He spotted her instantly. "Miss Carter," he greeted, his voice steady. "Thank you for coming." "I wasn't sure I should," she replied. He offered a calm nod and took his seat. "That's fair." A waiter came. She ordered tea. He ordered coffee. There was a brief silence, not awkward but expectant. Then Julian leaned forward slightly, resting his arms on the table in a gesture that felt deliberate, measured. "I didn't call you here to talk about what happened," he said. "I won't pretend I know you well, but I know what I saw, and I know it had nothing to do with your professional capability." Emily looked down at her hands. Her ring finger was bare, and she hadn't gotten used to how light it felt. "I don't need sympathy," she said quietly. "You won't find it here," Julian replied. "What I'm offering is work, a challenge, and the space to do it your way." That made her look up. He continued, "My firm is expanding its digital strategy in Southeast Asia. We need someone who understands cross-cultural branding, who can lead multiple teams, and who's not afraid to be the face of a bold shift. I thought of you before the meeting. What happened didn't change that." Emily didn't answer right away. It wasn't just the scale of the offer. It was the timing. It was the risk of stepping into something big while the ground beneath her was still unsteady. And more than that, it was the fear that her name might still be defined by someone else's mistake. "You're not worried the press will say you hired the woman who caused a scene?" she asked, not bitter, just honest. Julian's lips tugged into the faintest of smiles. Barely there, but genuine. "I don't care what they say. I care what you do with the chance." Her breath caught slightly. It wasn't flattery. It wasn't a rehearsed line. It was a simple vote of confidence, one she hadn't heard in a long time, at least not without conditions. "I don't have an answer right now," she said after a moment. "You're not supposed to," he said. "This isn't a rescue mission. It's a business offer, and I'm willing to wait." They finished their drinks with light conversation. Not about her personal life, not about the incident, and not about his company's numbers. They talked about books, the weather, what it meant to build something and risk being torn apart by people who didn't understand it. When they stood to leave, Julian extended his hand. She shook it. His grip was firm but respectful. There was no hesitation, no attempt to linger. "Whatever you choose," he said as she stepped toward the door, "don't let one man's failure to handle your strength become your own reason to dim it." She didn't respond. But for the first time in weeks, something in her chest moved, like a window cracked open in a room she thought had long since run out of air. That night, back in her apartment, she sat at the table alone, Julian's business card resting beside her phone. She hadn't accepted yet. She hadn't rejected it either. But when she picked up the card, she didn't put it down. And maybe that was the beginning of something. Not romantic, not yet, but something different, something hers. The first call from her mother came on a rainy Wednesday, just after Emily had returned from an early morning walk meant to clear her mind. Her clothes were still damp, her shoes dripping near the doorway, when her phone lit up with her mother's name. She hesitated before answering. She already knew what was coming. Still, she pressed accept. "Emily," her mother said, her voice soft but tight, the way it always got when she was trying not to sound accusatory. "I've been praying about you and Thomas." Emily sat on the arm of the couch, wiping her hair with a towel. "There's nothing left to pray for, Mom. I filed." Her mother sighed like she'd heard someone announce a terminal diagnosis. "Marriage isn't perfect, sweetheart. Everyone fights. You know your father and I." "No, Mom," Emily interrupted gently, but firmly. "You and Dad argued. You didn't slap each other in front of a room full of strangers." There was a long pause. Then came the same sentence Emily had feared for years. "I just think maybe you're overreacting." The words landed like a cold stone in her stomach. She wanted to scream, or cry, or hang up. But instead, she said nothing. Her mother continued, trying to sound calm. "People say things in anger. They act foolish. But to throw away a marriage, Emily, that's not how we raised you." Emily closed her eyes and whispered, "Then maybe you should be glad I raised myself in other ways." The call ended soon after that. her mother's disappointment heavy in the air like fog. It wasn't the disapproval that hurt most. It was the expectation that she should quietly endure something cruel just because other women had. Later that afternoon, it got worse. She received an email from a tabloid journalist asking for comment on a quote from a close family member. Emily's stomach dropped. She clicked the attached photo. It was her sister-in-law, Grace, smiling at a charity event. The article hadn't gone live yet, but the draft was cruelly specific. She's always been cold to Thomas. She made him feel inferior. I saw it coming. Emily put the laptop down and stared at the wall, her chest hollow. Grace, the same woman who had once borrowed her shoes for a job interview. The same woman who had called crying when her boyfriend left her, and Emily had driven an hour just to sit beside her on the floor with ice cream. She felt foolish. The betrayal stung sharper than the slap. She didn't call Grace. She didn't yell. She simply blocked her number, deleted her from every contact list, and removed the framed picture of them at Christmas from the bookshelf. The next morning, Thomas's mother called. Emily answered out of reflex. "I just wanted to say," the older woman began, her voice heavy with disappointment, "that you embarrassed our family. That's not how a wife behaves, running to lawyers and making a scene." Emily sat on the edge of her bed, blinking at nothing. "Did you see what he did to me?" she asked quietly. "I saw the video," Thomas's mother replied. "But people are saying you provoked him, that you're difficult, that you've changed." Emily didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She simply said, "I have changed," and hung up. That night, she didn't sleep. The silence of the apartment pressed on her chest like weight. She scrolled through old photos, not to remember, but to confront. Each image of birthday parties, holiday dinners, forced smiles held a new meaning now. They weren't happy memories. They were records of her trying, alone. By morning, she had made a list. Not a list of enemies, a list of people she no longer owed anything to. And with every name she crossed out, Grace, her mother-in-law, even her own mother for now, she felt something shift. It wasn't freedom, not yet, but it was the beginning of boundaries. The beginning of choosing herself even when it meant standing alone. She didn't cry, she didn't speak, but she walked to the mirror, looked at her reflection, and whispered like a vow, "I won't explain who I am to people who never cared to know." And for once, the silence around her didn't feel empty. It felt like space, her own. The morning light streamed across Emily's living room, soft and warm, but she didn't feel any of it. She stood by the window with her arms crossed, watching the world move without her. Below, people walked briskly, coffee cups in hand, laughter echoing off buildings. Life went on, uncaring, unstoppable. Her own life, however, felt suspended, floating somewhere between who she used to be and whoever she was becoming. Tasha entered without knocking. She never knocked. That was her way, bold, fast, unapologetically direct. She placed 2 paper cups of coffee on the kitchen counter, then kicked off her shoes and marched over to Emily, her heels clicking like punctuation marks. "We need to talk," Tasha said. Emily didn't move from the window. "I already know that tone. You're about to tell me to do something I don't want to do." Tasha raised an eyebrow. "No, I'm about to tell you to do something you have to do." Emily exhaled. "What is it this time?" Tasha walked over to the coffee table, opened her tablet, and slid it toward Emily. On the screen was yet another article. The headline blurred in her vision, but the words were unmistakable. "Wife's behavior pushed him too far," insider claims. It quoted anonymous sources, recycled rumors, and painted Emily as the ungrateful, success-hungry wife who emasculated her poor, tortured husband. "Another one?" Emily muttered. Tasha nodded, but her eyes weren't sad. They were burning. "They're building a story without you, Em. They're filling the silence with poison." Emily turned away. "I didn't ask for this fight." "I know," Tasha said, gentler now, "but it came anyway." They sat quietly for a while. The coffee grew cold. Tasha spoke again, softer but more firm. "I've been quiet for too long, too. My mother used to say, 'Don't stir the pot. Women are supposed to keep peace, not make noise.' I believed her. Yet until I realized, staying quiet didn't make me safe. It just made them louder." Emily listened, not because she wanted to, but because there was truth in every word. "Let's hold a press conference," Tasha said. You don't have to tell the world every detail. Just enough to remind them you're not the caricature they've drawn. You're real. You're not perfect, but you didn't deserve any of this. Emily's stomach twisted. You think that will change anything? It might not, Tasha admitted. But it will change you. You'll stop shrinking every time someone Googles your name. Emily ran her fingers through her hair. Her chest felt tight, her pulse fast. If I speak now, there's no going back. Tasha didn't blink. Then don't whisper. Say it so no one dares twist it. The silence that followed was different this time. Not heavy, not hollow, just full of possibility. They moved quickly after that. Tasha called a trusted journalist she knew from law school, a woman who had covered abuse and power imbalance with care. They arranged a small, controlled event. No frenzy, no flashing bulbs, just a simple room with a camera and a microphone. The night before the conference, Emily couldn't sleep. She sat in bed staring at the ceiling, heart thudding against her ribs. Her mind ran wild. What if she stuttered? What if they twisted her words anyway? What if she looked weak? But morning came, and with it, calm. Not the kind that came from peace, but the kind born from resolve. She wore a navy blue dress, simple and sharp, no frills, no soft pastels. She didn't need to look delicate. When she walked into the room, the air buzzed with quiet tension. Tasha stood near the back, arms crossed, chin raised like a warrior holding the line. Emily stepped up to the mic. She looked around at the reporters, the cameras, the faces waiting for a headline. Her throat dried, her hands clenched. But then she saw Tasha, and she remembered the fire. She took a breath. My name is Emily Carter. I'm a marketing executive. I'm also a woman who was hit by her husband in a room full of witnesses. That wasn't a private moment. It was a public violation. And now, the world wants to know what I did to deserve it. She paused. No one moved. I did nothing. But I endured everything. I stayed quiet to protect him. I smiled to protect myself. But silence only ever protected the wrong person. She told them just enough. Not the gory details, not the private scars, just the truth. Calm, unapologetic. When she finished, she didn't cry. She didn't collapse. She stepped back, nodded once, and walked away. Outside, the wind tugged at her coat. The sky was overcast, but her path forward felt clearer than it had in weeks. Tasha caught up beside her. You were brilliant, she said, grinning. Emily smiled just a little. I wasn't trying to be. You weren't. That's why it worked. They walked together through the city, not saying much, but something had shifted. Something real. Not the world, not the press, but Emily. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was surviving. She felt like she was starting to live. The backlash came fast. Only 2 days after Emily's press conference, the internet exploded with another narrative. This time, Thomas spoke. Not through a live appearance or a direct statement, but through carefully released media posted anonymously and picked up by click-hungry blogs and social pages. A photo surfaced. Emily, laughing at a rooftop dinner beside a male colleague. The headline read, "Smiles that tell a different story?" It wasn't recent. Emily recognized it from 6 months ago, a celebratory meal after landing a major campaign. But the way it was framed, cropped tightly around her tilted head and parted lips, made it look flirtatious. Then came more. Screenshots of old text messages, cherry-picked, out of context. A video clip, clearly from the day of the incident, but trimmed at the edges. It showed Thomas standing, fists clenched, Emily appearing emotional, Julian rising from his chair. But the crucial moment, the slap, was missing. Without it, the footage looked ambiguous. The internet, as it does, split in two. Some demanded justice, others accused her of attention-seeking. Words like liar, gold digger, and drama queen began circulating beneath her name. Emily sat on the floor of her apartment that night, her laptop open in front of her, the glow of the screen painting her face with cold light. The comments came in waves, thousands of voices, most anonymous, declaring her guilty without asking her a single question. She didn't cry, but she felt numb, like something inside her had been hollowed out. She shut the laptop and leaned her head against the wall, closing her eyes. Her breathing was shallow. Then her phone buzzed. It was a message from Julian. "I'm sending something. It will change things. Let me know if you're ready." Before she could answer, another message followed. Full footage. I had someone filming for security purposes. I never deleted it. It's yours to use. Her heart skipped. She called him immediately. Are you sure? Julian's voice was calm, grounded. You don't owe anyone your pain, Emily, but you do deserve truth. She hesitated. They'll say I planted it, that it's fake. They'll say worse, he replied. But truth doesn't need to scream. It just needs to stand still while the noise collapses. The next morning, the unedited video was uploaded from Julian's verified company account. No commentary, no emotional caption, just the raw footage. It began with the boardroom meeting. It showed Emily speaking, clear, composed. It showed Thomas entering, agitated. It showed her trying to de-escalate. Then, unmistakably, it showed the slap. The sound rang through the room. Her reaction, shock, stillness, pain, needed no words. The silence afterward was more powerful than any statement. The footage spread like fire. Major outlets picked it up. Analysts, anchors, legal experts all retracted their earlier skepticism. A prominent journalist tweeted, "This isn't just a story about a slap. It's about how fast we're willing to destroy a woman based on suggestion and how rarely we wait for the facts." For the first time, the tide turned. Thomas went quiet. His lawyer issued a vague, half-hearted statement about regrettable moments and emotional stress. But it was too late. The edited clip had already been discredited. Emily's version of the story was no longer just her word. It was visible. Even those who had doubted her began to shift. Quietly, but noticeably. Some deleted their comments, some apologized. But Emily didn't look for validation in them. She didn't scroll endlessly for praise like she once scrolled for pain. She stayed still, watching as the noise began to unravel on its own. Later that week, Julian invited her to his office, not for business, just to talk. They sat across from each other, surrounded by tall windows and quiet light. He poured her a cup of tea and said, "You handled it with grace." "I didn't feel graceful," she admitted. "Grace isn't how you feel," he said. "It's how you stay standing." They didn't say much after that, but there was a calm between them, like two people who understood that power didn't always roar. Sometimes it whispered in the form of choice. Emily walked out of his office not triumphant, but steady. The trial had never been in a courtroom. There was no judge, no jury, just the public, eager for a verdict. But now she had given them something they couldn't deny. Not vengeance, not shame, just truth. And that was enough. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. Emily stepped out, heels echoing on polished floors, a slim folder tucked beneath her arm. Around her, the quiet hum of conversation, the tap of keyboards, and the occasional laughter of people building something from nothing. It all felt new, but not foreign. It felt like a second breath after being underwater for too long. She walked down the corridor, past glass offices and conference rooms filled with light until she reached the last door on the left. The frosted glass bore her name, etched in subtle silver, Emily Carter, Strategy Director, Global Growth Division. She stood still for a moment, just reading it. Her name, her title, not attached to someone else's success, not shadowed by someone else's doubts. It was her own, earned, not gifted, declared, not inherited. Julian greeted her just minutes later. His expression calm as always, but there was a quiet pride in the way he handed her the key card and said, "Welcome, we've been waiting for you." She smiled, genuine and steady. "Thank you for not asking me to be anything else." He nodded, as if that was the only way this could ever have gone. Then, without lingering, he left her to settle in. There were no speeches, no forced applause, just space, hers to fill. The office wasn't large, but it had high ceilings and sunlight that poured through the tall windows in golden streaks. A clean desk, an empty shelf, the promise of beginning. She sat in the leather chair, leaned back, and closed her eyes for a moment. Her heart beat fast, not with fear, but with possibility. A knock came shortly after. An assistant entered, carrying a bouquet of ivory and pale blue flowers wrapped in soft paper. "Delivery for Miss Carter," she said. Emily blinked, confused. "From whom?" "No sender name," the assistant replied, handing her the small white card tucked inside. Emily opened it slowly. For the woman who finally chose herself. She didn't have to guess who sent it. She had. And that, more than anything, made her smile. She placed the bouquet in a tall glass vase by the window where the light could catch it throughout the day. It wasn't about decoration. It was a reminder. A small, silent celebration of a woman who had once believed walking away meant losing, but now understood it meant starting over. By noon, her team had trickled in. Young creatives, sharp analysts, designers with wild ideas, and even wilder hair. Emily greeted each one with calm confidence. She didn't overcompensate. She didn't perform authority. She just listened, asked questions, and took notes. And as the hours passed, the nervous edge she had walked in with began to fade. There was no one here asking her to shrink. No one waiting for her to misstep. Her job wasn't to prove anything. It was simply to build. That afternoon, Julian passed her in the hallway. "How was your first day?" he asked. Emily paused, then said, "I didn't feel like I had to apologize for existing. That's new." He smiled, not too wide, just enough. "You shouldn't ever have to." Their conversation was brief, but something unspoken passed between them. Respect that didn't need praise, connection that didn't rely on flirtation. It wasn't romance. Not yet, but it was mutual ground, and that was rare enough to feel sacred. As the day wound down, Emily returned to her office, now scattered with sticky notes and scribbled ideas. She glanced at the flowers again. In her past life, every room she walked into had felt borrowed. Now she sat in a room with her name on the door. Her name, not his, not theirs, just hers. And for the first time in years, she belonged. Not to someone else, but to herself. It started with a letter, a real one, not an email, not a text. Thick paper folded twice, hand-delivered to her office. No sender name, just her name written in familiar handwriting that curled slightly at the edges. "Emily, please, one conversation. That's all I ask." She sat with it for 3 days, read it once, then again. She didn't feel anger anymore, not the way she used to. What she felt now was stillness. Like the ache had faded and left a kind of clarity in its place. On the 4th day, she texted him, "Tomorrow, 11 a.m., the cafe near the park, 1 hour." "That's all." He replied immediately. She arrived on time. The cafe was quiet, tucked between a bookstore and a florist. She'd been there before, years ago, on a day when Thomas had read her a chapter from his manuscript, and she had told him he was brilliant. That day felt like another life now. He was already seated when she walked in, jittery, overdressed, eyes scanning the door like a man waiting for forgiveness. When he saw her, he stood quickly, knocking his coffee slightly. The cup wobbled but didn't spill. "Emily?" he breathed, as though her name still had weight. She didn't smile, but she nodded. She sat across from him. Her coat was still buttoned, her bag still on her shoulder. She wasn't here to stay. He studied her, eyes flicking across her face like he was trying to memorize something. "You look different." "I am," she said simply. There was a pause. Then he leaned forward, voice soft. "I'm sorry." Emily didn't flinch. "I know." He looked down, twisting the corner of a napkin. "I was scared," he said, eyes suddenly wet. "You were slipping away. You were shining so bright, and I didn't know how to keep up. I didn't want to lose you." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, calmly, "You didn't lose me the day you hit me, Thomas. You lost me long before that. You just never noticed." His face broke. A single tear fell. He didn't wipe it. "I didn't know how to love you the right way," he whispered. "No," she agreed, her tone neither cruel nor forgiving. "You knew how. You just didn't want to." She reached into her bag, pulled out a small velvet box, and placed it on the table between them. His wedding ring. The one he had slipped on her finger with trembling hands all those years ago. It looked smaller now, out of place. "I held onto it for too long," she said. "I thought maybe one day I'd feel something when I saw it. But now I don't. So I'm returning it. Not for you, for me." He didn't touch it. "I loved you," he said. "I know," she replied. "But love isn't enough when respect is missing." Thomas opened his mouth to speak, but she stood before he could. "I hope you get help," she added. "I hope you write again. I hope you find peace." And then she left. She didn't look back, not once. Outside, the city moved the way it always did. Cars honking, wind brushing her hair, strangers passing without pause. She walked steadily down the street, each step quieter than the last, but every one of them forward. There were no tears, no second thoughts, only a silence that felt, for the first time, like closure. The ballroom shimmered with light from the overhead chandeliers, each one casting warm reflections across the floor where chairs were lined neatly in rows, all facing the stage. A gold-framed banner read, "Women Who Build the Future, a Leadership Dialogue." At the center of it all stood Emily Carter. She wore a tailored cream blazer over a midnight blue blouse, her hair tucked behind one ear, her hands steady as they gripped the podium. Her voice filled the room, not loud but firm, deliberate, shaped by experience and sharpened by resolve. We were told for years to sit down, to wait our turn, to soften our tone so others could stay comfortable. But leadership isn't volume, and it's not permission, it's clarity. And when clarity arrives, it doesn't knock. A ripple of nods spread through the crowd. Some took notes, some just listened, eyes wide. Behind the final row, leaning unobtrusively against the back wall, was Julian Monroe. He didn't clap louder than the others. He didn't call attention to himself. He watched her speak with a calm pride, his hands in his pockets, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Because she was no longer just the woman who stood up after being struck. She was the woman who had kept standing. When the event ended, Emily thanked the organizers, posed for a photo or two, and accepted compliments with grace. The crowd slowly spilled out into the city evening, the sky now painted in hues of lavender and deep gray. Julian waited at a respectful distance until the room was nearly empty. When he finally approached, she looked up and smiled. "Didn't think you'd come," she said. "I didn't want to miss this," he replied. "You were remarkable." Emily slung her bag over her shoulder. "You're biased." "Maybe," he said, lips twitching into something softer, "but still right." They left together, walking side by side through the quiet streets. It was early spring. The trees lining the sidewalk were just beginning to bloom, tiny white petals fluttering to the ground like snow that had changed its mind. They didn't talk about work, not about the past, just the world around them, an art exhibit opening nearby, a bookstore she'd found with a cat sleeping on the poetry shelf, the cafe she now preferred for late-night writing. And then, without ceremony, they reached her building. They stopped beneath the porch light. For a moment, they simply stood there, not in hesitation, but in shared stillness. Julian glanced at the steps, then at her. "If you ever want company," he said, voice quiet but certain, "not to lean on, but to walk beside, I'm here." Emily looked at him, really looked at him. She didn't feel the pull of romance the way it was written in novels, not butterflies or dizzying heat. What she felt was steadiness. Well, a door left open, not because she needed it, but because it was okay to choose it. She smiled. "I'll think about it." And she meant it. He nodded, not disappointed, not expecting more. Just there, present, willing. Then she turned and walked up the steps, her keys jangling softly in her hand. At the door, she looked back once. "Thank you, Julian." "For what?" "For never trying to save me." He tilted his head. "You never needed saving." And she stepped inside. Her apartment was warm, filled with the scent of jasmine from the diffuser by the window. She set her bag down, kicked off her shoes, and curled up on the couch. There were no headlines now, no whispering family, no rumors to silence. Just quiet. And in that quiet, Emily didn't feel small. She didn't feel like the woman who had been slapped in a boardroom. She felt like the woman who had walked away from it, built something new, and returned with her name on the door. Not broken, but whole.